On today's show, I told you last week where I thought members of the Cavs were among the top 100 players currently in the NBA. Where do I expect them to be a year from now? We'll talk about that. Plus, the Cavs are back on Christmas Day. We dive into all that and so much more on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham, and you might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. And I wanted to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure to drop us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, and of course, be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube as we get started here, do us a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us. Click subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, redeem code Locked On NBA. That is LOCKEDON NBA. For $20 off your first purchase. Again, that's code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Welcome back to another week of Locked On Cavs. Sorry, there was no episode on Monday this week. I got married this weekend, so I did not, as you might imagine, have the time on Sunday to record a podcast episode to air on Monday. So I am back at it Monday evening right now recording. It is 10:09 p.m. on Monday, August 11th, as I record this. It will be August 12th on Tuesday as you are listening to this. So that is why there was no episode on Monday, but the show does go on. And I am back today. I will be back the rest of this week. Also, next week, going to have a bunch of crossover episodes where I'm going to sort of catch up with everybody else in the Eastern Conference about what summer has been like for the team that they cover. If you remember the whip around episodes from during the regular season that would come out each and every Monday, that next week is going to be like a giant one of those where I talk to basically every playoff team in the Eastern Conference. So make sure to stay tuned and make sure to be subscribed to that. But if you remember the episode that I put out at the end of last week, talked a lot about where I had members of the Cavs inside the NBA's top 100 that we are going to be putting out here at Locked On at some point later on this summer. I turned my votes in last week and talked about it before the end of the week. And one of the things that I wanted to get to, but didn't necessarily have time to do, was I wanted to talk about where I thought guys on the Cavs would be a year from now, right? Because to rehash some of my rankings, was very high on Donovan Mitchell. I rated him as the number 5 player currently in the NBA. I was very high on Evan Mobley, rated him as the number 15 overall player in the NBA. I ranked Darius Garland number 26, which I think is probably going to be maybe a little on the high end of where he's going to be because the playoffs that he had weren't great because of the injury, but I don't think that's going to be too far off from that. I was probably a little bit lower on Jarrett Allen than consensus. I had him as number 62 overall. I had DeAndre Hunter at number 61 overall, and those were the 5 Cavs that I had in the top 100. So where do those guys rank next year? And is there somebody on the Cavs right now that could find themselves in the top 100 next year? Wanted to tackle those things today. So the one guy that I look at, and I think this guy could, should, will make a jump up this list next year, is Evan Mobley. I do think right now he's a top 15 player in basketball. I think he's closer to 15 than he is to 10. As I mentioned, I had him exactly at 15. But I think when you win Defensive Player of the Year, when you are second team All-NBA, when you have those things going for you, I look at it and say, it's hard for me to say that guy is not a top 15 player in basketball. And going into last season, I held the opinion on Evan Mobley that I thought it was a little fair to be cautious about his offensive upside just because, his third year didn't necessarily go the way everybody imagined it to. And injuries were certainly part of that, considering he had pretty bad ankle injury. He needed a knee surgery during the season. So I don't know that season that he had, that third season, was what everyone expected of him. And I think that meant that maybe some people, and maybe I'm a little bit guilty of this, but maybe some people saw his potential as going down a little bit, as that ceiling maybe not quite being the Kevin Garnett or Tim Duncan type of ceiling that was placed upon him when he was drafted number 3 overall by the Cavs a few years ago. So I do think that maybe impacted some thinking. Maybe it impacted mine a little bit. And I thought going into last year, Evan is going to be somebody that probably makes an all NBA team, probably makes multiple ones, probably at some point wins the Defensive Player of the Year award, is going to perennially be on the all defense team, is going to be somebody that is maybe not a perennial all-star, but an all-star like 2 out of every 4 years or maybe 3 out of every 5 years, but not necessarily somebody that you look at and say, yeah, that guy can block off all-star weekend for the foreseeable future because he's going to be at the game. And then he goes out and had the year that he had last year. And I think that the year that he had last year, especially offensively, the leap that he made on that end of the floor has changed my opinion about where I think Evan is going to be 1 year from right now. Right now, I think he's number 15. Next year, I think we're having a conversation about Evan Mobley being a top 10 player in basketball. And I do think that the jump from 15 to 10 is not a small one. And we talk about this more often with NBA teams and the steps that teams will take in team building. And if we go back to what the Cavs were before Evan Mobley got here, where they were a team that I believe they had won 22 games, or maybe it was 21 games, but they did not win very many games the year that Evan Mobley was at USC. They were a team that was among the NBA's worst. They didn't necessarily have the worst record in basketball. They got some lottery luck because they were able to move up and then select Evan Mobley at number 3 overall in that draft. But they went 22-50 in what was a shortened season. Then they add Evan Mobley, and they go from what was, objectively speaking, a bad team to a good team. The Cavs in Evan's first year were 44-38. They had a much better start to the season than they did finish to the season. I think they caught a lot of teams by surprise early on, and they were a team that at a certain point looked like they should be a lock to be a team that was in the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. They didn't finish the season as strongly. They had some injury issues. And ultimately, they finished 44-38. So they doubled their win total. They made a really big jump. And they showed that it's possible in one season to go from being a bad team to a good team. That's a jump that you can make. That's a jump we see teams make all the time in the NBA. The Detroit Pistons last year were a horrible team. This year, they were a good team. They made that jump. Now, what is always the more difficult thing, and Evan Mobley has not had to go through that. He's never been a bad NBA player, so that part of the comparison doesn't necessarily matter. But what does matter is then the Cavs were 44-38, and then they were 51-31, and then they were 48-34. And yes, in there, they traded for Donovan Mitchell, and they had a season where they dealt with a lot of injuries. It was not easy for them to go from being a good team to a great team. And then this past season, they go from what was a good team, probably an underachieving 48-win team, but did advance in the postseason, to a team that won 64 games. That was objectively a great team this past year. Now, things didn't pan out in the playoffs, and the Cavs still have more steps to take, but the most difficult step to take is going from good to great. And the Cavs did that. And now Evan Mobley, and maybe even the more difficult step to take, which is the one that the Cavs have to take right now, is going from great, which the Cavs are, to elite. And I think Evan Mobley right now has become a great player in the NBA. And I think that now he needs to take the step going from a great player to an elite player. And I think that 15 in the NBA, like if you want to say it as elite because there are 450 players in the NBA and, you know, he is one of the 15 best, that is rarefied air. But I think going from 15 to 10 is probably more difficult than going from 30 to 15. And I think a year ago from right now, he was probably outside of the top 30, if we're being honest with ourselves. He was probably somewhere around 50. So we can even say he went from 50 to 15, which is a really big jump. And that is going from good to great. But I think going from 15 to 10 or 15 to 8 or 15 to 7 or wherever, we're talking about Evan Mobley next year. If this year goes according to plan, I think that is the more difficult jump to make. That is the thing that I think would be more impressive than what he did from this time last year to right now. And I do think Evan Mobley has that. I think that he has the ability to do that. And that is how I am expecting him to be talked about 12 months from now. I think the way we are going to look at Evan Mobley 12 months from now is I'm not sure there's going to be a question about him being the best player in a championship team. I think that 12 months from now, if all goes according to plan for Evan Mobley, he will have shown that he's capable of being the best player in a championship team. I think Donovan Mitchell is there. I don't know how long Donovan Mitchell is going to be there. I think it is very rarefied air to be in. But I think Evan Mobley 12 months from now could be right there. So I will say, I think next year, when I do my top 100 list again, I think I'll be talking about Evan Mobley as somebody that I believe is a top 10 player in basketball. Now, there were 4 other guys in my top 100 that they're going to be maybe in the same exact spot, maybe somewhere else. We'll dive into those 4 next right here on Locked on Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose the spot for a show that you've been dying to see because getting concert tickets can be a gigantic pain in the behind. Well, it's not with Game Time because live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. And that is exactly where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. And prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime. You can save up to 60% off with their killer last minute deals. Maybe you're tired of scrolling, trying to find the best deal out there because it can be an exhausting process trying to make sure that you're getting the best price on a deal. Well, Game Time's zone deals pick the best seats in the best section for your liking. And if you wonder what your seat's going to look like, that is something I care about when I'm going to something. I want to know exactly what my view is going to be. The Game Time app shows you with a panoramic seat view exactly what your view is going to be, so there are no surprises. So what you need to do is take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, that is LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off that first purchase. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you again for making Locked on Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure to drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. And of course, be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked on Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And I told you where I think Evan Mobley is going to be next year. But now I want to shift to some of the other guys on the Cavs. And Donovan Mitchell was the one that right now I have as a top 5 player in basketball. And admittedly, that might be a little bit high. And I'm not sure that I would be stunned if anybody else that voted in this has Donovan Mitchell any higher than 5th. But I do think that some people might see the light and see him as a top 5 player in the same way that I do. That said, I think next year he's probably a little bit lower than number 5. And if he is, I don't think that's necessarily his fault. For a lot of what I believe to be true about Evan Mobley to happen, Donovan Mitchell needs to take a bit of a step to the side. And I do think that he willingly did that. And that's part of the reason why he's viewed as a top 5 player in basketball, because he had a fantastic season last year while playing essentially a career low in minutes because the Cavs were so good. They were able to blow out so many teams, and he was able to sit a lot of fourth quarters. And I do think that this year, there's going to be more of an emphasis in Cleveland on Evan Mobley offensively, where he's going to be tasked with doing more, and Donovan Mitchell is going to be tasked with doing a little bit less. And the thinking there is going to be, well, if Evan does more in the regular season, he's going to be able to do more in the postseason, and Donovan Mitchell will also be able to do more in the postseason because he hopefully will not be dealing with a lower leg injury the way that he has been in each of the last 2 postseasons. So because of that, and because of Evan's ascension, I think Donovan's probably going to drop marginally. I don't think he's going to be a top 5 player next year. I think that he will probably be somebody that is still on MVP ballots, that is still an all NBA player, that is still looked at as one of the faces of the NBA. But I do think also when you look at some of the guys that I rated as behind him, Anthony Edwards, certainly one that comes to mind, and I had him as the number 10 player in basketball. I would not be surprised if Anthony Edwards this time next year is viewed as a better basketball player than Donovan Mitchell. I don't have him there right now, but I also think that it's more likely than not that next year I have 2 members of the Cavs in the top 10. When I talk about Donovan Mitchell dropping, I'm not saying he's going from number 5 to number 15. I'm saying he's going from number 5 to maybe number 8 or 9. And maybe Evan Mobley is right in front of him, or maybe he is directly behind Donovan in these rankings. But I do think that a slight drop for Donovan Mitchell would not be the biggest deal in the world, because in all likelihood, a slight drop for Donovan Mitchell probably means that Evan Mobley took the rise, took the leap, stepped up to the challenge that I talked about in the first segment. And if the Cavs are to win a championship, Evan Mobley rising is something that needs to happen. And as part of that, Donovan Mitchell might slightly drop down. Doesn't mean he's a worse basketball player. Just means that things might look a little bit different for him. Now, I also had Darius Garland at number 26. And I actually think this is about where he'll be next year. And it's not because I think Darius Garland has reached his peak. I don't. But I do think that there are some guys behind Darius Garland that could be primed to make jumps up in these rankings. I look at somebody like Amen Thompson of the Houston Rockets, who I have as the number 41 player in basketball right now. I think he could be somebody that takes a very similar leap to what Evan Mobley did last year, where he goes from somebody that is maybe a top 40, definitely a top 50 player in basketball, to somebody that could be an all NBA player. I think that he could be prime for something like that. Jalen Johnson in Atlanta could be in a similar boat to him. And I do think there will be guys that are ahead of Darius that fall behind Darius, but I just think a top 25 player, 25, 26, 27 is about what Darius Garland is. I think he is somebody in the way that I described Evan Mobley earlier, of what I thought Evan was going to be before last season, where, he's at 3 out of 5 All-Star games, which Darius Garland has the chance to be. He's somebody that makes an all-NBA team or 2 throughout his career, which I think Darius Garland has the chance to do. The Defensive Player of the Year stuff, not on the cards for Darius, but I think that type of trajectory is one that Darius is probably on. I think he is a secondary star player, and if Darius Garland at the number 26 best player in basketball is the 3rd best player on any given roster, that roster is going to be really freaking good. And that is exactly where the Cavs are at. And that is where I expect the Cavs to be for the foreseeable future. I don't know that I don't think Darius is done getting better, but I don't know that he's going to ever be, because of some of the limitations of being a one-way guy, not the fact that he's just not a very good defender. I do think that limitation is something that maybe holds him back from being a top 20 player. I think around 26, 25, that neighborhood is right for Darius Garland. I just don't know that it's going to be much higher than that at any point. And then the 2 other guys that I had on this list from the Cavs were DeAndre Hunter and Jarrett Allen. And I think that Jarrett Allen will probably be somebody that comes out a little bit higher on this list than where I voted him. I would not be surprised if he is around 50. I voted him here because I weigh the postseason stuff into this conversation. And with Darius Garland too, if he goes out and has a great postseason next year, he could certainly jump up this list. Like, that is the recipe, I think, for him to climb up this leaderboard, to be somebody that maybe is viewed as a top 20 player. As if he has a great postseason, that would be the way to do it. But with Jarrett, I think he has proven that he is a very good core role player, but he's not a core star player. And I think that those guys are going to continue to rise. And I think Jarrett Allen is kind of maxed out who Jarrett Allen is and will be. And he's a very good basketball player, but I do think that the fact that his postseason performances have left a little bit to be desired certainly docks him. And I think that is something that we do have to talk about when we're talking about Jarrett Allen. And I had DeAndre Hunter at number 61. And this, to me, is the most interesting one. because DeAndre Hunter is still a relatively young player. He was in the same draft class as Darius Garland. He was selected one pick ahead of Darius in that draft. And I think that he, outside of Evan Mobley, I think he might have the most room to grow of any established player on the Cavs. I think when the Cavs traded for DeAndre Hunter, it wasn't just that he was a really good fit for what they have. It wasn't just that there was the hope that he could come in and seamlessly fit with a team that had championship aspirations a couple of months after acquiring him via trade. But it was also that, hey, maybe there's some untapped potential here. Maybe the role or the supporting cast that he played alongside in Atlanta wasn't necessarily getting the most out of DeAndre Hunter. Now, I don't know that, and development, of course, is not linear. People develop at different rates. Basketball players don't always. It's not a straight line up. There are ebbs and flows, and I do think there could be some of that untapped potential with DeAndre Hunter. I'm not saying that he's going to blossom into an All-NBA player or even an All-Star, but I do think that there's the possibility that DeAndre Hunter could be somebody that next year. Right now, I have him at number 61. Are we talking about him as a top 40 player in basketball next year? I don't think that's a crazy thing to think. I think that is something that, given the right role, playing on the right team, performing at the level that he is very clearly, I think, capable of performing at, I think it's possible that DeAndre Hunter is viewed in that light next year. I'm not necessarily ready to go and predict that, but I do think it's possible that that could be the case for DeAndre Hunter. I think that maybe under the right circumstances, he can grow in a way that maybe wasn't necessarily expected when the Atlanta Hawks traded him away. Now, there was some scheduling news from the Cavs late last week that was reported by ESPN. We've not talked about it yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Christmas Day Cavaliers next, right here on Locked On Cavs. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. Like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button for us. In the Cleveland Cavaliers, it was reported by ESPN's Shams Charania that they will be playing the New York Knicks at Madison Square Garden on Christmas Day. This will be the first time the Cavs have played on Christmas Day since 2018. And you might remember some guy named LeBron James was on the Cavs roster back in 2018. So they were a pretty big draw back then. And this is, I think, a very well-deserved honor for the Cavs. They won 64 games. I think them being on Christmas this year was a very predictable thing. They belong on Christmas. They are, in my opinion, one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the NBA. And I think that they should be a team, especially considering that they have a lot of young talent. They should be a team that is playing on Christmas. This should not be a one-year thing. I think we should expect to have Cavs basketball on Christmas perennially moving forward, because I do think they're going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Eastern Conference for quite some time. I think that this is the start of probably what's going to be about a 5-year streak of the Cavs playing on Christmas Day, provided everyone stays healthy, because you do look at that Christmas Day schedule, and what do you notice about it? There are only 2 Eastern Conference teams playing. It's the Cavs, it's the Knicks. It's the 2 teams that everybody predicts will finish number 1 and number 2, at least in the regular season in the Eastern Conference. And the playoffs are a different beast, and we will get to that bridge. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But these are supposed to be the 2 best teams in the East. The Knicks are always going to be a team that plays on Christmas. They're always going to have the early game on Christmas because they are the New York Knicks. Whether they're good, whether they're bad, the Knicks play on Christmas. That's how it goes. But the Cavs playing on Christmas is something that should be looked at as an honor. And the fact that there are only 2 teams in the East playing on Christmas is kind of crazy to me. The fact that 8 Western Conference teams, because there are 5 Christmas Day games, but 8 Western Conference teams are playing on Christmas, and the Cavs are one of 2 Eastern Conference teams playing on that day, I do think kind of gives, and we will later this week we'll learn more about the schedule Tuesday morning. If you're listening to this Tuesday afternoon, maybe we've learned some more Cavs things. We will learn more about the full schedule later this week. I believe it's going to come out at some point this week. So we'll learn more about that when it gets here. But I think that this is a sign of things to come as far as nationally televised games for the Cavs go. I don't think that there are a lot of teams in the East that are going to draw a lot of eyeballs. You look at teams that are expected to be good. Obviously, it's the Cavs, it's the Knicks. I think the Orlando Magic, I'm not sure they're a draw, but they're expected to be good. The Atlanta Hawks, who I don't think are a draw, but they should be pretty good. The Detroit Pistons, I think, should be pretty good, but they're not a draw. The Milwaukee Bucks are going to be pretty average, and they have the best player in basketball. The Boston Celtics are not going to be as good as they have been. Like Boston will still be a draw because they're Boston, but I think that the Cavs, maybe a bold prediction, I think the Cavs should lead the Eastern Conference in primetime games next year. I don't think they will. I think that the Knicks will because they are New York, and anytime the Knicks are good, it is great for the NBA, and nobody can debate that. But I do think that I look at this and say the Cavs are going to probably play close to 20 primetime games next year. I think that's a really cool thing, and I think it's a big honor, and it's a well-deserved one for the organization that the Cavs are playing on Christmas Day. I just do hope that a year from now, because I do think that they will be playing on Christmas Day for years to come, I hope a year from now it's in Cleveland, because I don't know if I want to travel to New York on Christmas Day, but I would certainly welcome going to a Christmas Day game in Cleveland, Ohio. But thank you for making today's edition of Locked on Cavs your first listen, and thank you for making Locked on Cavs your first listen every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. And if you're watching the show on YouTube as we get out of here, do us a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us. Click subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked on Cavs content. I'll be back tomorrow talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.